Some people meet in coffee shops. Some meet at parties. Ethan Cross met Victoria Sterling at mile marker 47 on a mountain highway, buried under 6 feet of snow, with someone already trying to kill her. If you've ever had a night that changed everything, stayed with us. Drop your city in the comments and hit like so I can see how far this story travels. Let's begin. The call came in at 11:42 p.m. Ethan heard it the way he always heard emergency calls in winter. Not with dread exactly, but with that particular sharpening of attention that happened when his brain shifted from tired father to the version of himself that knew how to work in the dark. He'd been asleep for maybe 40 minutes, still in his work jeans because he'd sat down on the couch to check on Lily and hadn't quite made it back to his feet. His daughter was 7, and she slept like the dead, which was a mercy, because the wind had been throwing itself against the house since 9 o'clock with the kind of sustained fury that made windows sound like they were breathing wrong. He checked his phone. Dispatch. The message was short. Highway 34, mile marker 47. Vehicle off-road. Unknown number of occupants. Conditions critical. He called back before he even stood up. "What's the situation?" he asked, already moving toward the kitchen where his gear hung by the back door. "One vehicle confirmed, Ethan." That was Janet on dispatch. She'd been doing this job for 11 years, and she had a way of delivering bad news that was calm without being cold. "GPS stopped transmitting about 20 minutes ago. Highway Patrol can't get anyone up there. Roads closed at the junction. We've got you, Marcus, and the Donnelly brothers on the rescue list, but Marcus's truck is out with the fuel issue, and the Donnellys are at the Hartley Ridge situation. You're the closest. How deep is it up there?" "They're saying 30 inches since sundown. Wind gusts over 60. Ethan looked at the window. He could see nothing but white movement in the dark. "All right," he said. "Give me 12 minutes." He hung up and went to Lily's room first. She was on her side, one arm hooked around a stuffed rabbit that had lost an eye sometime in the fall and hadn't had it replaced yet because Ethan kept forgetting to buy the right color button. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Just stood there, which was something he'd started doing without realizing it after Sarah left. Just checking. Just making sure. He sent a text to Donna next door, who was 71 and a light sleeper, and had standing permission to enter through the back if anything happened. Donna texted back in under a minute. "Already up. Go do your job." He was out the door in 9 minutes. The roads between town and the highway junction were passable. Barely. His truck was a 2019 F350 with a reinforced plow blade, snow chains, and a rack of emergency equipment in the bed that he'd been modifying and adding to for 3 years. It was not a beautiful truck. It had a dent on the passenger door from a deer strike in October, and the heater on the right side blew lukewarm at best. But it started in any temperature, moved through any depth of snow he'd ever pointed it at, and the winch on the front bumper had pulled 7 vehicles out of ditches and 2 off the side of a mountain in the 4 years he'd been doing this work. The radio was bad, kept cutting out. He drove with both hands and his eyes fixed on the cone of light ahead, reading the road the way you could only do after years of watching how snow piled and drifted, which lanes hid ice under fresh powder, where the shoulder dropped off, where the mountain curved blind and you had to slow even when you felt like you were already going too slow. Mile marker 40, 42, 45. He almost missed it. The vehicle wasn't visible from the road. Not really. What he saw was a broken length of guardrail and a disturbance in the snowbank that his headlights caught at the wrong angle and almost registered as shadow. He pulled to a stop, got out into the wind, and felt it hit him like something with intent. 60-mile-per-hour gusts didn't feel like weather. They felt personal. He clicked on his headlamp and walked to the guardrail. Below the shoulder, maybe 30 feet down a slope that wasn't quite vertical but was steep enough to be serious, was the back end of a black SUV. It was a Range Rover, late model, the kind that ran 6 figures, and it was buried past its wheel wells. The front end had gone into a drift that had packed hard against a cluster of pines, and from up top, Ethan could see no movement, no light, no sign that anyone inside was doing anything. He got back to the truck, geared up, and started the winch line. Getting down the slope was the first problem. The snow was fresh on top, but there was a hard layer underneath, freeze from earlier in the week, and his boots broke through unpredictably, which meant every step was a negotiation. He went sideways along the slope, slower than he wanted to, and by the time he reached the SUV, he could feel the cold working through the seams of his jacket. He knocked on the driver's window. Nothing. He tried the handle. Locked. He moved to the rear passenger side, knocked there. "Highway rescue," he called out, loud enough to carry over the wind. "Is anyone inside?" A pause. Then a voice. Female, controlled, careful even now, said something through the glass that he couldn't make out. "I can't hear you," he said. "Can you unlock the door?" Another pause. Then the click of the lock. He pulled the door open. She was in the back seat. That was the first thing he noticed. Not the front, not the driver's seat, but the back, on the far side, which meant she'd either moved there after the crash or she'd been riding back there to begin with. She was wearing a coat that looked expensive, even covered in spilled coffee, and what appeared to be a cracked screen from a phone she was still holding. Dark hair pulled back, a cut on her forehead. Not deep, but bleeding in that insistent way head cuts did. Her eyes were sharp. That was what struck him. Not frightened exactly. Assessing. She was looking at him the way someone looked at a situation before they decided how to handle it. "Are you alone in the vehicle?" he asked. "Yes." "Are you hurt anywhere besides your head?" She touched her forehead like she'd forgotten about it. "I don't think so. My chest hit the seatbelt. It's sore." "Any chance you lost consciousness after the impact?" "No." No hesitation. "I was aware the entire time." Ethan leaned in further and did a quick visual check. No obvious deformity in her limbs. She was sitting upright without favoring anything. Her pupils looked equal in the beam of his headlamp. "Can you move? We need to get you out of here and up to the road. The slope's going to be hard. I have a line." She looked at him for a moment, not arguing, just processing something. "My bags," she said. "We can't carry bags up that slope in this wind. I need my laptop bag." He almost said no. He looked at her face, and something in the way she said it, not demand, more like urgency wrapped around something she wasn't explaining, made him pause. "Where is it?" "Front passenger seat." He grabbed it. Black bag, heavier than it looked. He slung it over his shoulder and helped her out of the vehicle. Getting her up the slope took 17 minutes. She didn't complain, which he noticed. Plenty of people he'd pulled out of situations complained. About the cold, about the difficulty, about the pace. She moved when he said move, grabbed the line when he handed it to her, and when she slipped on the icy underlayer and went down to one knee, she was back on her feet before he could reach her. She had a slight limp by the time they reached the top. She'd twisted something on the way up, though she hadn't said a word about it. He got her into the truck's cab and cranked the heat. "I need to call dispatch," he said, reaching for the radio. "Wait." He looked at her. She was sitting very still, her laptop bag on her lap, both hands resting on top of it. The cut on her forehead had slowed. Her jaw was set. "Before you call anyone," she said, "I need to ask you something. You need a hospital. That cut should be... It's superficial, and we both know it." Her voice was even, not rude, just factual in a way that felt like it came from a lifetime of not letting small things distract from larger ones. "What I'm asking will take 30 seconds. Can you give me 30 seconds before you call?" He set the radio down. She looked at him directly, not the assessing look from before, something more deliberate. "Don't tell anyone at my company where I am tonight." The wind hit the truck hard enough to shift it slightly on its wheels. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "Your company?" "Yes." "Not the hospital, not emergency services. Your company specifically." "Yes." He'd pulled people out of bad situations before. He'd been thanked, tipped, invited to dinners he never went to. He'd heard 100 different versions of fear in people's voices after close calls. The shaky gratitude, the nervous laughter, the sudden crying that happened 10 minutes after danger was over when the body caught up with events. This wasn't any of that. This was a woman who knew exactly where she was, exactly what she was saying, and was watching him very carefully to see how he'd respond. "I don't even know your name," he said. "Victoria Sterling." He knew the name. Most people in Colorado with a radio or a television or an internet connection knew the name. Sterling Tech, headquartered in Denver. One of the largest privately held tech infrastructure companies in the country, publicly traded for 3 years, currently valued at something in the range of $4 billion. He'd seen her face on a magazine cover at the dentist's office sometime in the fall, Forbes or something like it, though he hadn't read the article. He looked at her now, in his truck cab, with coffee on her coat and blood drying at her hairline. "All right," he said. He picked up the radio and called Janet at dispatch. "Got her," he said. "One female, minor head laceration, possible ankle sprain. Road's not viable for transport back tonight. Winds are picking up, and I'm not making it down 34 with someone injured in this. I'm taking her to shelter. We'll check in when communications are stable." "Copy that, Ethan. Ranger Station 7's been stalked. It's the closest—" "That's where I'm headed. Over." He clicked off. Victoria was watching him. "Ranger Station 7, he said. "It's about 4 miles up a service road, I know. It's been maintained, but it's been empty since October. Generator, emergency supplies, heat. We're not going anywhere until this storm passes. The highway won't open until morning at earliest, probably later." He put the truck in gear. "You can tell me the rest when we get there." She turned toward the windshield. He could see her jaw tighten just slightly. "There's not that much to tell," she said. He pulled out onto the highway and pointed the truck into the dark. "There usually is," he said. The service road wasn't on any public map. Ethan had learned it 3 winters ago from a retired park ranger named Cole, who'd spent 40 years on these mountains and trusted Ethan enough to show him the shortcuts that rescue teams used when the main routes were impassable. It was barely a road, more of a worn path through the tree line that disappeared under normal snowfall, but that Ethan could find by landmarks. The split-trunk spruce at the first bend, the rock formation that looked like a broken wall, the slight upward grade that leveled before the final approach. He drove it in near silence, the only sound the engine and the weather and occasional static from the radio that no longer carried anything useful. Victoria sat with her bag on her lap and looked out the window at nothing. She'd closed off again, back to whatever internal state she occupied when she wasn't actively engaging with the immediate situation. Ethan had the impression of someone managing a great deal at once, juggling things he couldn't see. "What's your name?" she asked, without turning from the window. "Ethan Cross." "Do you do this full-time, rescue work?" "It's volunteer. I run a shop in Granby, mechanical repair, vehicles mostly, some equipment. I've been doing rescue work on the side since I moved here." A pause. "You moved here?" 4 years ago, from Pueblo." "What made you leave?" He considered how to answer that. "Change of plans," he said, which was true in the way that shorthand was true. It covered the important part without requiring him to explain Sarah, or the year before he came here, or the particular way a marriage ended when it wasn't dramatic so much as it was a long, slow withdrawal of warmth from something that had started warm. Victoria seemed to accept the non-answer. She was quiet again. Then, "I have a daughter." He wasn't sure why he said it. It wasn't relevant to the situation. Maybe it was because he'd been thinking about Lily when he drove. The particular background awareness he carried always, like a second heartbeat, and it had surfaced. Victoria turned from the window. "How old?" 7. Something crossed her face. Not pity. He would have minded pity. Something more like recognition. "Is she with someone tonight?" "Neighbor, Donna. She's reliable." "Good." She turned back to the window. "That's good." Bad. Ranger Station 7 was a one-room structure built in the late 80s, maintained by the state for use in exactly these circumstances. It was roughly 400 square feet, a main room with a wood stove, a basic kitchen counter with a propane burner, a table, 2 cots, and a storage closet with emergency supplies. It smelled like cedar and old dust when Ethan pushed the door open, and the cold inside was a different quality than the cold outside. Still and accumulated rather than violent. He found the generator in the utility shed attached to the back, got it running on the 3rd pull, and came back in to find Victoria standing at the window watching the storm with her coat still on and her arms crossed over her chest. "There's a first aid kit in the closet," he said. "You should let me look at that cut." "I told you it's fine." "I know what you told me." She looked at him over her shoulder. Something in the directness of it, the slight challenge, wasn't unfriendly exactly. More like she was deciding whether to bother maintaining a boundary that probably didn't matter here. She sat down at the table. He found the kit, pulled on gloves from his jacket pocket, and leaned in to examine the laceration. It was about an inch long just above her left eyebrow, already clotting well. He cleaned it with antiseptic. She didn't flinch, which he noted, and applied 2 butterfly closures. "You've done this before," she said. "Enough times." He sat back. "You need to keep that dry. It's not going to scar if you leave it alone." She nodded. Her hands were on the table now, loose, and he could see them properly for the first time. She wore a single ring, not on her left hand, on her right, a thin silver band that was too plain to be decorative. Something else, then. A reminder, maybe, or a habit. "All right," he said. He went to the stove and started building a fire from the wood stacked along the far wall. "Tell me about your company." "I didn't say I would." "No, you said don't tell them where you are. That implies something's wrong that goes beyond wanting privacy." He fed paper under the wood, struck a match. "We're here until morning, minimum. I'm not going to push you, but I've got nothing but time and you look like someone carrying something heavy." The fire took. He closed the stove door and turned back. Victoria was looking at her hands on the table. The tight control in her face had shifted. Not gone, but less architectural. More like something was pressing against it from the inside. "My board of directors is meeting in 9 days," she said. "There are 4 members who have been systematically working to remove me as CEO. They've been leaking financial projections, selectively, the ones that look worst out of context, to 3 major institutional shareholders. There's a vote scheduled. If they can demonstrate that I'm either incompetent or unstable before that vote, they have a viable case." She paused. "Disappearing during a major weather emergency, unreachable, off the grid, that's the kind of thing they would use." Ethan watched her. "So they're not dangerous. They're just political." She was quiet for a beat. "I don't know that they're only that." "What does that mean?" "It means I have an investigation happening internally right now, looking at the leak source. And 3 days ago, someone I trust told me that 2 of the board members have been in contact with a company that provides—" She stopped, chose her words. "Security services, private ones, the kind of services that aren't about keeping you safe." The fire was making noise now, the snapping and settling of wood taking heat. Outside, the storm had picked up again, wind coming in waves. Ethan sat down across from her. "You think someone sent people after you?" "I think it's possible they arranged for me to be tracked. My route tonight wasn't planned. I changed it last minute because of a call I had to take. But if someone had access to my vehicle's GPS through the company system—" She stopped again. "I'm probably being paranoid." "Are you usually paranoid?" A small, dry exhale. Not quite a laugh. "No, I'm usually the person who tells other people they're being paranoid." "Then maybe trust your instincts on this one." She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since the truck. "You believe me." "I don't have a reason not to." "You don't know me." "No. But you're not telling me this to impress me. You're telling me this because you've been holding it alone and you're exhausted." He said it matter-of-factly, without softness. "You look like someone who hasn't slept properly in about a month." Her expression did something complicated. 2 months, she said. Then, as if the admission surprised her, "I haven't said that out loud before, so The generator held and the stove filled the room with dry heat, and they found a packet of instant coffee in the supply closet that was old enough to be questionable, but hot enough to matter. Victoria took hers black. Ethan took his the same way because the powdered creamer that came with the kit smelled wrong. For a while they didn't talk. She opened her laptop. It had survived the crash in the padded bag, which seemed almost deliberately unfair to Ethan, who had broken a phone by dropping it on carpet, and worked on something he didn't look at. He sat with his own coffee and checked the radio periodically, getting nothing, and watched the weather through the single window above the kitchen counter. At some point around 1 a.m, she looked up. "Why are you single?" she asked. He turned from the window. "Excuse me?" "You mentioned your daughter, no mother, 7 years old, you moved 4 years ago." She said it with the same directness she'd applied to everything else. Not intrusive, just observational. "I'm not trying to pry, I notice things. It's a habit. Her mother and I split when Lily was 2. He considered how much more to say. It wasn't ugly, it was just over. She moved to Portland. We have an arrangement. Lily sees her in summer. It works, mostly. Mostly. Sarah's better in small doses. He looked at his coffee. That sounds harsh. It's not meant to be. We wanted different things. She figured that out before I did. She left you. She left the life we'd built. I happened to be in it. He said it without bitterness, which had taken him about 2 years to achieve. It's fine now. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I've never been able to make a relationship work past 18 months, she said. Then, as if she wasn't sure why she'd said it, that's probably too much information. It's fine. Men either want to run the company alongside me, or they want me to stop running it. There's no... She stopped. There's no middle ground where I'm just a person. Ethan looked at her. The firelight did something to her face, softened the precision of it, showed the tiredness she'd been managing. She was younger than he'd expected. Up close. 30, maybe. She ran $1 billion company, and she looked like someone who hadn't figured out how to turn it off. What made you want to build it? He asked. The company. She looked at him like the question was unusual. Nobody asked me that. What do they usually ask? About the valuation, about competition, about my plans for the next fiscal year. She set the laptop aside. My father started a small tech services firm in 1987. He ran it until I was 12 when he had a heart attack, and the business collapsed within a year because he'd never built it to run without him. We lost everything. She said it plainly. I was 17 when I decided I would build something that couldn't be destroyed like that. Something structured properly. Something that survived whoever tried to take it apart. Including your own board. A corner of her mouth moved. Including my own board. And here you are, he said. Here I am, she agreed. In a ranger station in a blizzard, telling a stranger things I don't usually say out loud. I'm a mechanic, he said. We're good at listening while things are broken. She laughed then. A real one, not the polite exhale from before. It was brief, and it surprised her, and she looked slightly annoyed at herself for it, which made it better. He checked in with Donna at 2:15 via a text that barely went through. Lily's fine, still asleep. Roads, bad. Morning at earliest. I'm at 7. I know, Janet called. You have company? Yeah. Anybody I'd recognize? He looked across the room at Victoria, who had fallen asleep sitting up with her laptop balanced on her knee, her head tipped back against the cabin wall. Probably, he typed back. He went and gently moved the laptop before it fell. She startled awake. Sorry, he said. I wasn't sleeping. Okay. She looked at the laptop in his hands. I was just resting my eyes. Completely different thing. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully categorize. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone quieter, more... She paused. Deferential. Is that what you're used to? Everyone I interact with wants something from me. They're all very... She searched for it. Angled. Even the people who are genuinely kind have an agenda they're working toward. I pulled you out of a snowbank. My agenda was getting home before 3 a.m. Right. She took her laptop back. See? That's what I mean. At 3:40, a sound reached them through the storm. Ethan heard it first, which was unsurprising, since he'd grown up around mountain weather and knew the sounds it made. This was different. Not weather. He stood from the cot where he'd been lying without sleeping and went to the window. Lights. Far off, maybe a mile down the access road, moving slowly. 2 of them. Not emergency lighting, just headlights. Low and steady. Victoria had heard him move. She was sitting up. What is it? Probably nothing. He kept his voice level. Could be another rescue team. Could be highway crew checking the access roads. But, he turned from the window. You said they might have had access to your GPS through the company system. She was on her feet now. Her face had gone back to that controlled stillness. The look from the truck, from the first moment he'd opened the door. Managing. How far away are we from anyone? She asked. 6 miles from the nearest town. Highway's impassable. He went to his gear bag and pulled out his satellite communicator, a personal device not connected to the company network, hardened against weather. I can get a message out on this. It's slow, but it works. Who would you contact? State Emergency Management, Sheriff's Department, but response time in this weather. He looked at her. It'll be over an hour, minimum. The lights outside were closer now, still moving, but slowly, picking their way up a road that shouldn't have been accessible to anyone who didn't know it was there. Victoria looked at him. For the first time since he'd pulled her out of the snow, the control cracked. Not into panic, she wasn't a person who panicked. He'd determined that in the first 20 minutes. Into something more like a hard, clear acknowledgement of how bad this was. They knew the road, she said. Yeah. Company vehicles have full GPS telemetry, including the access points I visited. She said it fast, working the logic aloud. They would have the data from when I drove up here last fall for the... She stopped. I came up here once for a retreat, 2 days. They would have that in the system. All right. He went back to the window. The lights had stopped. Still a half-mile out, maybe more. They stopped. Why would they stop? Conditions, or they're not sure. He turned back to her. They don't know we're here specifically. They know you were somewhere in this area based on the GPS. They're searching. He looked around the cabin. The single window, the door, the utility shed attached to the back. We have options. What options? This cabin backs up against a trail system I know. In summer, it's a hiking trail. In winter, it's... He paused, working it out. Difficult, but navigable if you know what you're doing and you're dressed for it. You want to go out in this? I want to be somewhere other than here if those lights start moving again. He moved to the supply closet and started pulling things out. An extra base layer, emergency blankets, a second headlamp. There's a service outpost 2 miles through the trees. It's not maintained, but it's structure, and it's in a direction they won't have coordinates for. Victoria watched him move. He was efficient, and he didn't ask her permission, and she had the particular expression of someone who was accustomed to being the one making decisions and was recalibrating. I need my bag, she said. You're going to carry that for 2 miles in a blizzard. That laptop has files that are currently the only copies of the evidence I've been building against these people. Her voice was steady. Yes, I'm carrying it. He handed her the extra base layer. Put this on under your coat. She took it without argument. He sent the message on the satellite communicator. Victoria Sterling, possible threat. Ranger Station 7 area, requesting law enforcement, and got a confirmation signal back. Slow. It would get there. Whether it would get there in time was a different question. He looked at her. This woman with blood dried at her hairline and a laptop bag over her shoulder and 2 months of sleeplessness in her eyes. And for 1 second thought about Lily at home, about Donna in the house next door, about the ordinary morning that was waiting on the other side of this storm. Ready? He said. Victoria zipped her coat. I've been ready, she said. He opened the back door and the storm came in. The trail was hard. That was the only word for it. Hard in the way that took everything you had and still asked for more. The snow was deeper in the trees than in the open. Wind-driven drifts had packed against the trunks, and the trail itself was invisible, a thing Ethan navigated by memory and by the irregular spacing of the pines, and by the slight downward pull of the terrain that he'd walked in better conditions enough times to read. Victoria was behind him, one hand on the line he'd run between them. A simple measure, 30 feet of cord, so that if either of them went down, the other would know. She kept pace. She didn't ask how much further. She didn't tell him she was cold, though he knew she was cold because he was cold and he had more experience and better gear. Once she went down, a section where the snow over a buried log gave way, and she dropped to her hip. He was back to her before she'd finished falling, braced her back up, and she was moving again in under 10 seconds with nothing said between them. An hour in, she spoke. What made you stay? She said. Her voice was tight with cold, but even. After Sarah left? Why Colorado? Why this? He kept moving, picking the next step. Lily needed stable, he said. Granby was stable. And I was... He felt for the word. I was done with a certain kind of life, the shop, the mountains, the work. It's hard, but it's honest. I know what I'm doing every day. That sounds like something a person says after being very unclear about what they were doing. You're not wrong. Were you unhappy before? He thought about Pueblo, the bigger shop he'd co-owned with a partner who turned out to have different ideas about money. The marriage that had been good for a while and then had quietly, persistently stopped being good. The feeling of running hard on a track that wasn't going anywhere. I was functional, he said. Not the same thing. Behind him, a short sound. Acknowledgement. Or maybe recognition. I know that feeling, she said. He believed her. The outpost appeared at the edge of his headlamp's reach at just past 5 in the morning. A dark shape between the trees, smaller than the station, but intact. The door sealed against weather. He got it open with a tool from his kit, got them inside, got the emergency blankets around both of them while he assessed the space. No generator here, just the cold structure and shelter from the wind, which was substantial. Victoria sat on the floor with her back against the wall and her bag in her lap and said nothing for a full minute. Then, "Thank you." He was crouched by the door watching through the gap. Nothing moving outside. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "You came out in the worst storm in 10 years to pull a stranger out of a snowbank and then walked her through a blizzard in the middle of the night without once making it about yourself." She said it without sentiment, just stated. That's the job. It's not, actually. The job was getting me to shelter. The rest was a choice. She paused. I don't understand people who make choices like that. He looked back at her. She was watching him with that direct, assessing look again, but it was different now. The assessment was less guarded, like she'd reached some conclusion. "What about your daughter?" she asked. "What about her?" "She must be... she sees you do this. She knows what you do. She thinks it's pretty normal. She'll probably think it's normal until she's old enough to figure out it isn't." He turned back to the door. "I hope she keeps thinking it's normal as long as possible." Silence. Outside, the wind had shifted. A different note, slightly lower, which sometimes meant the storm was organizing rather than easing. "What's her name?" Victoria asked. "Lily." The way she said it back was very quiet, not a question, just Lily. He turned back to look at her. She was looking at the floor, the blanket pulled close, and she had an expression he couldn't fully read in the dark. Something that had nothing to do with board meetings or conspiracies or $4 billion. Something that was just a person, cold and tired, holding on to something that wasn't hers. He didn't say anything. He turned back to the door and watched the dark between the trees and waited for whatever came next. Outside, the storm was still going, but it had peaked. He could feel it. The storm peaked at 6:17 in the morning. Ethan knew because he'd been watching the wind through the outpost's single narrow window. A slot, really, more like a gap in the logs where a board had warped over the years. And he'd been tracking the pattern of it, the intervals between the big gusts, the way snow moved in the beam of his headlamp when he cracked the door. Weather had a rhythm if you paid attention long enough. This one had been building towards something for hours, and when it finally hit the top, a sustained howl that made the structure creak in a way that was borderline and not comfortable. He felt it the same way you felt a fever breaking in someone you were watching. The worst was happening, which meant the worst was almost over. Victoria had not slept. She was sitting against the far wall with the emergency blanket around her shoulders and her laptop open on her knees, the screen light blue in the dark interior of the outpost. He didn't know what she was working on, and he didn't ask. Whatever it was, she'd been at it for 90 minutes with the focused silence of someone who worked the way other people breathed. Not because they particularly wanted to, but because stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. He'd checked his satellite communicator twice. The message to emergency management had confirmed received. No response yet, which didn't mean nothing was happening. Just that in conditions like these, happening and arriving were two very different timelines. "They're still out there," she said, without looking up from the screen. "Probably. They're not moving, though. Nobody moves in this. They moved to get here. To the area, not through it." He shifted his position against the doorframe. "They're in their vehicles, waiting. For the storm to clear." "Yeah." She closed the laptop. looked at him across the small dark space. And then what? And then we're out of here before they start moving. He held up the communicator. I've got a location ping with emergency services. When conditions allow response, they'll come to the coordinates I sent. We just need to be visible and in one piece when they get here. That's the whole plan? It's a solid plan. She looked at him for a beat. You say that with a lot of confidence for a man sitting on the floor of a condemned outpost. It's not condemned, it's unmaintained. The difference being, one's a legal status, one's just deferred maintenance. He looked at the ceiling, where a water stain the size of a dinner plate suggested the roof had opinions about heavy snow. It's holding. She made that sound again, the almost laugh, the one she caught before it fully happened, like she wasn't sure she had permission for it. He'd noticed she did that, reeled herself back from moments of looseness, as if levity was something she had to ration. Tell me about the board, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Why? Because we have 2 hours minimum before anything changes. You're not sleeping, and talking about it is better than sitting with it. She considered that. Then she set the laptop aside and pulled the blanket tighter and said, 4 of them, out of 9 total board members. Gerald Marsh, who's been on the board since before I took over. Patricia Hale, who joined 3 years ago. She represents a hedge fund with a 15% stake. Dennis Cho, who I brought on myself 2 years ago, which was my mistake. And a man named Robert Vance, who nobody talks about much, but who has been very quietly in contact with the other 3 for about 8 months. How do you know about the contact? I have someone inside. She said it without apology. I know how it sounds. But when you run something this size, you learn that information is either yours or it's being used against you. There's no neutral ground. Who's your person? I'm not telling you that. Fair enough. He watched her. What do they want? The 4 of them. What's the actual goal? Acquisition. She said it like the word tasted wrong. There's a company, Meridian Systems, based in Austin, that's been trying to buy Sterling Tech for 18 months. We're vertically integrated in ways they aren't, and our infrastructure contracts with 3 federal agencies make us extremely valuable to the right buyer. I've refused every approach. She paused. Marsh and Vance have a private relationship with Meridian's CEO that predates this board conflict by 2 years. If I'm removed and replaced with an interim CEO who's more receptive to acquisition talks, the company could be sold within a quarter. And they get what? A cut? Advisory fees, board retention agreements with the new parent company, possible executive appointments? She said it without heat, just the flat recitation of something she'd turned over many times. About $40 million between the 4 of them, give or take. Ethan was quiet for a moment. That's a lot of money to drive someone into a mountain in a blizzard for. Nobody drove me into the mountain, the weather did that. The weather, and you changed your route because of a phone call. Yes. Who called you? A longer pause this time. She looked at the floor. My CFO. He told me Marsh had called an emergency shareholder briefing for tomorrow morning. Not the full board meeting, a pre-meeting, informal, just the major shareholders. The kind of thing you do when you want to shape a narrative before the official vote. She exhaled. He said the briefing deck had already been distributed. I haven't seen it, but based on what I know they've been leaking, it'll be a selective presentation of our Q3 numbers, our infrastructure contract renewal timeline, and… She stopped. And probably something personal. Personal how? She looked up at him. I had a period about 18 months ago when I was… She chose the word carefully. Not performing at the level I hold myself to. There were some decisions I made that were reactive rather than strategic. I lost a contract I shouldn't have lost. I had a board conflict that became public in a way I didn't manage well. They have documentation of that period. They'll use it to argue instability. Were you unstable? She seemed to appreciate that he asked it directly. I was going through something difficult, personally, and I let it affect my work for about 4 months before I corrected it. She paused. That's the most honest I've been with anyone about that. What were you going through? She shook her head once, not refusing exactly, just not ready for that one. He didn't push. He looked back at the door, at the thin line of gray light that was starting to appear at the bottom of the gap. Not dawn yet, but the deep solid black of the worst of the night had shifted. "You said Dennis Cho was your mistake," he said. "How do you bring someone onto a board and have them turn on you in 2 years?" Something crossed her face. Not embarrassment, but close to it. The specific discomfort of a competent person confronting a decision that didn't fit their self-image. Dennis was... I thought he was an ally. We'd worked together before, indirectly, when I was building the company. He understood the vision. He was articulate about it. She picked at a thread on the emergency blanket. "I think I chose him partly because he agreed with me, and I should have been more careful about people who mostly agree with you, because you can't always see what they're after." What was he after? Power adjacent to mine, which is a different thing than being on your side. Ethan thought about his former business partner in Pueblo. Different industry, same math. "I know that type." "I imagine you do." She looked at him. "You run your own business, single, mountain rescue on the side. That's not a life you accidentally build. That's a life you build specifically to limit the number of people who can disappoint you." He sat with that for a moment. It was more accurate than he wanted it to be. "Maybe." "Not maybe." She said it without cruelty. "I recognize it because I do the same thing, differently, but same principle." She paused. "The difference is that I have $4 billion of organizational structure between me and the people who want something from me, and you have 4,000 feet of altitude and a truck that could probably survive a nuclear event." He almost laughed. "The truck is good," he admitted. "The truck is extremely good." Outside, a sound. Both of them went still. But it was just the weather shifting, a gust that came from a new direction and hit the structure differently. Not vehicles, not movement. They both let out a breath at roughly the same moment, which would have been funny under other circumstances. "How long have you been doing this alone?" she asked. "Which part?" "Lily. Raising her." He thought back. "Really alone?" "About 3 years. The first year after Sarah left, we were still figuring out the arrangement. There was back and forth. But for 3 years now, it's been just us in the house." "What's that like?" He didn't answer immediately, because the honest answer had a few layers, and he wasn't sure which one she was asking about. It's. He stopped. Tried again. "It's the most important thing I've ever done. By a lot. And it's the most tired I've ever been. Both things at the same time, all the time." She nodded slowly. "Does she know that?" "The tired part? I try to keep that from her." "Not the tired part. The important part." He looked at her. "I show up," he said. "Every day. I figure she'll understand what that means eventually." Victoria was quiet. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, lost the precision she usually maintained, gone softer without being sentimental. "My father showed up every day too," she said. "I understood what it meant at 7. Kids understand more than you think." Ethan looked at the floor. He thought about Lily asleep in her room with the one-eyed rabbit, about Donna next door, about the ordinary Tuesday morning waiting on the other side of this storm, like it had been waiting all along, patient and unremarkable and more valuable than he could adequately say. "Yeah," he said. "I know." The light at the bottom of the door was definitely gray now, still pre-dawn, but moving that direction. The storm's voice had changed, still loud, still serious, but the quality of it was different. It wasn't climbing anymore. Victoria had picked up the laptop again. She was scanning something, scrolling fast in the way people did when they were looking for a specific thing rather than reading. Then she stopped. "I have the briefing deck," she said. "Your CFO sent it?" "My internal contact did." She was reading, and her expression was doing things he was watching carefully. Not the controlled mask, but the real version. The one she wore when she thought no one was assessing her. A tightening around the eyes. A stillness in her jaw that was different from the composed stillness. Something that looked like a person being punched slowly, by numbers she recognized. "How bad?" he asked. She didn't answer for a moment. Then, "They cherry-picked 8 quarters of data out of 14. Every metric in that deck looks like deterioration because they excluded the quarters where we outperformed." She was still reading. "They've included a section on leadership stability concerns with internal memos from 18 months ago. which means someone gave them internal documentation. She scrolled further, her mouth tightened. There's a quote, attributed to a named executive, someone I trusted. Who? She shook her head, but her hand had stopped moving on the trackpad. She was just looking at the screen, and for the first time since he'd pulled her out of that SUV, through the slope, through the wind, through the miles of dark trail, she looked genuinely hurt. Not managed hurt, not professionally processed hurt, just hurt, the way a person looked when someone they counted on chose a different side. Ethan didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that would help, and he knew it. Sometimes the right move was just to not leave. After a moment, she closed the laptop and put it in the bag with precise, controlled movements. All right, she said. I need to file a formal response to this deck before that briefing tomorrow. I need to reach my legal team. I need to reach 3 specific shareholders directly, and I need to do all of it before 9 a.m. She looked at the communicator in his hand. What can that thing actually do? It can send text messages, slow, about 40 words a minute best case. That's going to be a problem. How long is the response you need to file? The response itself, 600 words. The shareholder messages, 3 messages, maybe 200 words each. She was calculating. That's 1,200 words total. He did the math. About 30 minutes at best, maybe 40. And we need to be out of here before the men in those vehicles start moving. Weather should ease enough for them to move in about 90 minutes. Rescue team could arrive within 2 hours of that, possibly less. He looked at her. It's tight. It's very tight. She held out her hand. Give me the communicator. He gave it to her. She looked at it for exactly 3 seconds, oriented herself to the interface. He saw her figure it out without instruction, just the particular intelligence of someone who understood systems quickly, and started typing. He watched her for a moment. The way she worked wasn't what he'd expected, though he couldn't have said exactly what he'd expected. She was fast, but she wasn't frantic. She prioritized without agonizing. She drafted a sentence, read it, made one change, moved on. No second-guessing the second-guessing, just decisions. In sequence, executed. It was something, watching that. He turned away and went to the door and checked the conditions outside. Wind still high, but the gust patterns had lengthened. More time between the big ones. Snow had slowed to something dense and steady rather than the near-horizontal drive of the peak hours. The sky to the east was beginning to differentiate itself from the mountains, a slightly lighter charcoal against the black ridge line. Dawn was coming. Not fast, but coming. He thought about the vehicles down the access road, about the kind of people who got hired to track and recover a specific person in the middle of a mountain storm, on behalf of board members who wanted her back under control before a shareholder meeting. He'd been trying, since the outpost, to assess how serious that threat was. People hired to intimidate were different from people hired to harm. People hired to return someone to corporate headquarters under duress were different from people hired to make sure she couldn't testify. He didn't know which category these were. That uncertainty was the part he kept coming back to. Done, Victoria said behind him. He turned. She was holding out the communicator. He took it and checked the send log. 4 messages. Confirmed transmitting. 32 minutes, he said. I type fast. She stood up, the blanket falling away, and he saw her wince as she put weight on the ankle she'd turned on the slope. She caught him noticing. It's fine. You said that about your head too. My head was fine. This is also fine. She took a step, careful, even, and added, I'll manage. 2 miles back to the station, then wherever the rescue team meets us. That's a lot of managing. I've managed worse. He looked at her. I believe you, he said. Doesn't make the ankle better. She looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between irritated and something warmer that she didn't seem to have a name for. You're very direct. So are you. I'm direct because I've built a career on it. You're just that way. Is that a complaint? No. She said it simply. It's not. She picked up her bag. What's the plan? Wait for rescue team or try to move back toward the station? He thought about it. The outpost was better cover, smaller footprint, harder to find unless you knew where to look. The station was where he'd sent the coordinates, which meant that's where any rescue team would go first. It was also where the men in the vehicles would logically begin searching when the storm eased. "We move," he said, "but not to the station. There's a fire access road that meets the main highway about a mile east of where you went off the road. I know the service team checks it after major storms. If I can get a second message out with updated coordinates." "Already sent," she said. He stopped. "What?" "While I was sending the shareholder messages. I pulled the location data from your communicator's GPS, calculated the rough coordinates of this outpost, and sent an updated position to the emergency services number you used." She looked at him. "You left me with the device for 30 minutes. I'm not going to not use it." He stared at her for a beat. Then he laughed, really laughed, a short, solid sound that surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. "Fair enough," he said. She almost smiled, almost. "The fire road. That's still the right move?" "Yeah, it's exposure, but shorter distance, and the tree cover on the north side is good enough that we won't be visible from the access road the other vehicles are on." "Then let's go." She adjusted the bag on her shoulder, settled her weight, tested the ankle once with her jaw set. Then, "Ethan." He was already at the door. "Yeah, I'm glad it was you who found me." He looked back at her. She was standing in the middle of the outpost with an emergency blanket crease on her coat and dried blood at her hairline and her laptop bag over one shoulder, and she said it the way she said most things, straight, without decoration, but there was something underneath it that was just a person saying a true thing to another person in a difficult hour. "Let's get you out of here first," he said. "Then we can talk about Glad." He pushed the door open. The cold came in. They went out into it together. The trail back was harder than it had been going in. The wind had rearranged the snow in the hours they'd been sheltered, filling in the compression marks his boots had made and creating new drifts where there'd been clear passage before. He went first, breaking trail, setting a pace that accounted for her ankle without making it obvious that was what he was doing. She kept up anyway. At one point, maybe 40 minutes in, she pulled even with him on a section of the trail wide enough to walk side by side, and they moved like that for a stretch without talking. Just two people working through the same difficult terrain toward the same uncertain destination. He thought about what she'd said, about recognizing the life he'd built, about limiting the people who could disappoint you. He hadn't thought of it that way exactly. He'd thought of it as simplifying, as finding a kind of life that matched what he was actually capable of rather than what he'd once vaguely planned for. But she wasn't wrong. There was architecture in his solitude that hadn't just happened. He'd made choices, small ones and large ones that added up. He glanced at her. She was watching the path ahead, her breath visible, her face set with effort but not desperation. She was someone who'd built architecture too. Just different architecture, $1 billion of it, and it was currently under attack by people she'd trusted. Not that different, maybe. The scale was different. The stakes were different. But the essential thing, the thing where you build something that matters and then have to fight to keep it, that part was the same. The fire access road appeared through the trees right where he expected it. He stopped, listened. Wind, snow, the creak of branches, no engines, no voices. He looked at her. She nodded. They stepped out of the tree line onto the road and the wind hit them full. No shelter now, just open ground and gray morning sky and the highway visible about a quarter-mile ahead, a dark line between white fields. Somewhere behind them, he knew, the men in the vehicles were waiting for the storm to ease enough to move. They had maybe an hour, maybe less. He took a step forward and she was right beside him, matching his pace on the open ground, her shoulder occasionally touching his as they navigated the uneven surface beneath the snow. And somewhere to the east, across the mountains, the sky was lightening in the slow, indifferent way it always did. Storm or no storm, emergency or ordinary morning, because the weather didn't care about any of it. Only the people caught in it did. They heard the engines at 7:43. Ethan had been watching the highway from the edge of the tree line for 6 minutes, Victoria beside him, both of them standing still in the way people stood when they were trying to take up less space than they actually occupied. The fire access road met the highway at a junction marked by a reflective post half buried in the drift, and the plan had been simple. Get to the highway, stay visible, wait for the rescue team whose updated coordinates Victoria had transmitted from the outpost. Simple plans had a way of meeting complications. The sound came from the north, the direction of the access road they'd left behind, which meant the vehicles had started moving. The storm had dropped enough in the last 40 minutes to make travel possible, barely, for something with four-wheel drive and enough weight to push through the remaining accumulation. Ethan heard the engine note change as the vehicle hit the junction of the access road and slowed. "They're at the station," he said. How far?" "Mile and a half? Maybe less." He turned and looked at the highway in both directions. Nothing. The road was empty and white and completely still in both directions as far as visibility allowed, which wasn't far. "Our team should have been here by now." "Conditions," Victoria said. She wasn't asking. She was reminding herself. He could hear her working through it the same way he was. "Yeah." He looked at the tree line behind them, then back at the highway. "We have two options. We stay here, visible, wait, or we move east along the highway toward town and close the distance to the rescue team. Moving east means being visible on the open road. Staying here means being findable if they have any kind of tracking on you." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the company phone she'd been carrying since the crash, the one she'd been deliberately not using. She looked at it for a second. Then she put it down in the snow, face up, at the base of the reflective post. "If they're tracking the device," she said, "it stays here." Ethan watched her do it without comment. It was a clean decision, made fast, and he appreciated the lack of ceremony around it. Some people would have held the phone and deliberated for 2 minutes. She put it down and stepped away from it like it was a thing she'd already finished thinking about. "East," he said. They moved. The highway was worse than the trail in one specific way. It was exposed. The wind came across the open road without anything to break it, and the snow it carried was fine and horizontal and got into the gaps between collar and skin, between glove and sleeve. Victoria had her head down and was moving with purpose, the laptop bag tight against her side. And if the ankle was giving her trouble, she'd found a way to absorb it into her gait that made it almost invisible. Almost. He stayed at her pace, which was faster than he'd expected. 15 minutes out, he heard the second engine. Closer this time, and coming from the wrong direction, east, which meant they weren't rescue. He put his hand out, stopped her. "Listen." She listened. Her jaw tightened. "There's 2 of them." "Yeah, one from the access road, one from the highway." He turned, reading the terrain. On the south side of the highway, the ground dropped into a drainage channel that in summer was a creek bed. In winter, it was buried, but the depression was still there, maybe 8 feet below the road surface, choked with brush and young pines close enough together to provide cover. "Down there," he said. "That's a ditch." "It's cover." She looked at it, looked at the road in both directions. Then she went over the edge without further discussion, which was becoming a pattern he respected deeply. The drop was steep, and the snow at the bottom was soft. They went in past their knees, which was miserable, but absorbed the impact. He came down behind her and immediately moved them further into the brush, away from the road's edge, until the highway above was just a gray line through the branches. The first vehicle passed about 4 minutes later. It was a black Suburban, moving slowly, the kind of slow that meant it was looking for something rather than just driving carefully. Ethan watched it through the brush. Tinted windows, no markings, Colorado plates he couldn't make out from the angle. It rolled past without stopping. Victoria was beside him, not moving, not speaking. The second vehicle came from the east about 8 minutes after the first. Also black, also moving slowly, also with the deliberate pace of a search pattern rather than transit. It stopped. Just stopped. On the highway, maybe 100 feet from where they'd gone over the edge. Ethan heard a door, then voices, muffled by the wind and the distance and the brush, but voices. 2 men at minimum. He couldn't make out words. He heard one of them laugh, which was somehow the most unnerving part. The casualness of it, the way it suggested they weren't particularly concerned, that this was a job and they were doing it with the professional equanimity of people who found things for a living and were accustomed to finding them. Victoria's hand found his arm in the dark under the brush. Not grabbing, just contact. He didn't move. The voices went on for a moment, then a door closed. Then the engine note changed and the vehicle moved. Eastward, back the direction it had come. He counted to 90 before he breathed normally. They saw the phone, he said quietly. They went past the post and saw it. And now they think I went east. Bought us time. He looked up at the road edge. Not much. When they don't find you further east, they'll come back. How much time? 20 minutes? 30, if the road's bad enough to slow them. She was already calculating. He could see it in the quality of her stillness, that particular interior motion of someone running numbers. The rescue team's coordinates are at the outpost, she said. We're 1.5 miles from there. Moving through the drainage toward the back of the station avoids both vehicles. But it puts us back where they started looking. It puts us back where the rescue team knows to look. He looked at her. It's the best option. She didn't argue. She started moving through the drainage eastward and then angling south, navigating the buried channel by feel and by the pitch of the ground. He went ahead and broke trail again, and they moved without talking, conserving breath and attention for the terrain. The drainage curved, which he'd counted on. It ran along the back of the property line that the ranger station sat on, and if they followed it far enough, they'd come up behind the utility shed rather than the front of the building, less exposed, less visible from the access road. They were 40 minutes in when he heard it, a different engine sound, high and sustained, coming from above. Victoria heard it too. She stopped and looked up through the branches, and through a gap in the trees, Ethan could see the underside of the sky, still heavy with cloud, and a shape moving through it. A helicopter, flying low and slow and deliberate. Search and rescue. He pulled the satellite communicator and sent a single burst. Highway 34 drainage south of station, ready for pickup. The helicopter swung in a wide arc. He grabbed Victoria's arm and pulled her to the drainage's edge, to the clearest open ground he could reach, and they both started moving toward the opening. And the helicopter turned toward them, and for the first time since 11:42 the previous night, Ethan felt the particular loosening of the thing that had been wound tight in his chest since the moment he'd heard those engines on the access road. Then the Suburban came over the hill. Well, it came from the north side, the access road junction, which meant the first vehicle had doubled back faster than he'd calculated. It came fast, not cautiously anymore, which meant they'd worked out from the decoy phone and the helicopter that their window was closing. The Suburban came off the road and onto the shoulder and stopped at the edge of the drainage, 40 feet from where Ethan and Victoria were standing in the open. 2 men got out. They were dressed practically. Heavy winter gear, no uniforms, nothing identifying. The first one was large, mid-40s, with the particular physical economy of someone who'd done physical work for a long time and didn't waste motion. The second was younger, leaner, and he was the one talking. "Miss Sterling," he said it like a greeting, conversational, like they'd been expected. "We've been asked to escort you back to Denver. The board is concerned about your welfare." Victoria stood very still. Ethan was beside her, slightly forward, without having made a conscious decision to move that way. "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said. "Ma'am, this is for your own—" "Don't." Her voice cut it off cleanly. "I know who sent you. I know what this is. And there's a rescue helicopter about 90 seconds from this position. So whatever you're planning to do in the next 90 seconds, you should think about that." The younger one looked up at the helicopter, which was visible now, dropping toward the open ground ahead. He looked back at Victoria. Something in his expression shifted. The practiced calm of a professional whose job had just gotten complicated in a way that changed the risk calculation. The larger one had been looking at Ethan. "Step aside," he said. Not aggressive, just informational, the way someone stated a practical preference. "No," Ethan said. A beat. "You're not part of this." "She's in my care." "So I am." The man studied him the way people studied a situation before deciding whether it required escalation. Ethan had been in enough tight spaces over enough years to know how to stand in a way that communicated something without being a provocation. Not aggressive, not backing down, just present in a way that suggested moving through him was going to cost more than going around. He had his phone out and was recording. He'd started the moment they'd gotten out of the vehicle. He didn't make a show of it, just held it low and steady, the lens pointed toward the 2 men and the Suburban and the plates he could now read clearly. The younger one saw it. His eyes went to the phone and then back to Ethan's face, And in that second, Ethan saw the exact calculation happen. Recording, helicopter incoming, public highway, exposure. The calculation that made this a bad job to finish. "This is over," Victoria said. Her voice was even, but it carried. "Whatever you were paid for tonight, you've already earned it. The helicopter is here. Walk away." The helicopter settled into the open ground 30 feet ahead, and two figures in county search and rescue gear were moving toward them across the snow. The younger man said something to the larger one, too quiet to hear over the rotors. Then they got back in the Suburban. The engine started. The vehicle pulled back onto the road and moved north, steadily, not rushing. The particular studied casualness of people who wanted to look like they were leaving because they chose to, rather than because they had to. Ethan watched until it was out of sight. Then he exhaled. One of the rescue personnel reached them, a woman he recognized from the county team, Reyes, who'd been on 3 call-outs with him in the past 2 years. She looked at his face and then at Victoria and said, with the professional understatement of mountain rescue workers everywhere, "Rough night?" "Little bit," Ethan said. The rescue team had a jeep and a medic and a thermos of coffee that was not as bad as the instant powder from the station and significantly better than nothing. They got Victoria into the vehicle, and the medic, a compact, efficient man named Sorensen, re-examined her head laceration and confirmed it was closing cleanly and assessed her ankle, which had more swelling than Ethan had known because she'd never once mentioned it. "Grade 1 sprain," Sorensen said. "Possibly 2. You're walking on this?" "I've been walking on it for 3 hours," Victoria said. Sorensen looked at her with an expression that contained equal parts professional concern and involuntary respect. He wrapped it without further comment. Ethan sat in the front seat and sent the recording to his own email from his phone. Then he sent it to a second address. His attorney in Granby, a meticulous woman named Adkins, who handled his business contracts and who he figured would know what to do with a video of 2 private security operatives attempting to compel a CEO into their vehicle on a public highway, or who could find someone who did. Then he sent it to the satellite communicator's emergency management contact with a note. Evidence of potential unlawful detention attempt. Plates attached. Requested federal review. He didn't know if that last part would land anywhere. He wasn't a lawyer, he didn't know the precise statutes, and for all he knew, these men had been hired entirely legally to perform a transportation service that they'd conducted within technically acceptable limits. But the recording existed, the plates existed, and from what Victoria had told him about the board conspiracy, there were federal securities fraud implications that made private security operatives acting on behalf of those board members a potentially interesting detail for people with actual investigative authority. Victoria was watching him from the back seat. "Who are you sending that to?" she asked. He told her. She was quiet for a moment. "The emergency management contact? Will they take that seriously?" "I don't know, maybe not immediately, but it's time-stamped, location tagged, and transmitted through an official channel." He turned to look at her. "It exists. That's the part that matters. It exists somewhere they can't reach it." She looked at him for a long beat. "You thought of that. In the middle of all of that. You thought to record it, and you thought about where to send it. I had 90 seconds while they were talking. Most people wouldn't have thought of that." Most people aren't responsible for someone else's safety on a regular basis. You get in the habit of thinking a few steps out. He turned back to the front. "It's the same thing I do on a rescue call. What can go wrong? What's the contingency? It's just a habit." "It might have just saved my company," she said. He didn't answer that. Through the windshield, the highway was coming into visibility as the Jeep moved south. The familiar landmarks of the approach to Granby, the road signs he drove past 3 times a week, the particular shape of the mountain line against the sky that had become background to his daily life. He thought about Lily. He needed to call Donna. He needed to actually eat something, which hadn't happened since yesterday afternoon. He needed to look at the recording again and figure out what, if anything, was usable beyond the plates and the faces. "Ethan," Victoria said from the back seat. "Yeah." "The briefing. The one the board scheduled for this morning. That's happening in..." She looked at her watch. 90 minutes. "Can you call in? Join remotely?" "I can." She looked at the laptop bag in her lap. I sent the shareholder messages and the response document from the communicator. Those should have arrived, but being present matters. Showing up matters. She said it like she was working through it, not like she was asking his opinion. The shareholders who are targeted by this briefing, they need to hear from me directly, not through a written response. How far is Denver from here? 2.5 hours in normal conditions. Reyes had heard that from the driver's seat. Roads from here to 70 are passable as of 20 minutes ago, she said. We've got a plow crew running it. I can get you to the junction in 40 minutes from here. Victoria looked at Ethan. He looked back at her. I can drive you, he said, if you can get a vehicle at the junction. I can call my assistant. She can have a car there. She already had her hand on the borrowed phone the medic had given her. A basic thing, fully disconnected from the company network. If the road's clear by the time we get to the junction, it'll be close, Reyes said, but doable. Victoria made the call. Short, efficient. Her assistant, a woman who apparently handled chaos with remarkable steadiness because the call lasted under 2 minutes and accomplished 3 things simultaneously. Car arranged. Legal team notified of the recording's existence. 2 shareholders contacted for pre-briefing calls within the hour. She hung up and looked out the window. Outside, the mountains were doing what they always did after a major storm, emerging from the white confusion back into their actual shapes, the familiar ridges and faces reappearing as the visibility lifted. They looked the same as they always did, enormous and indifferent, and in the particular way of things that outlasted everything, oddly reassuring. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. You've been asking me things all night. One more. She turned from the window. Go ahead. The period you mentioned, 18 months ago, the 4 months where things went sideways. He kept his eyes on the road ahead. You said it was personal. You don't have to tell me what it was, but I'm asking because you built something real, and you defended it tonight in a blizzard on a cracked ankle without once being the person they were trying to make you into. Whatever happened then, it's not what defines what I saw tonight. She was very quiet. I had a miscarriage, she said. He hadn't expected that. He didn't say anything. I wasn't in a relationship that was going anywhere. It wasn't planned, but I was 12 weeks along and I'd started to... She stopped, started again. I'd started to adjust my thinking about what my life was. And then it was gone, and I had a board meeting 3 days later, and I sat in that room and I made decisions that I look back on now and I can see exactly where my head wasn't. She paused. Nobody knew. I didn't tell anyone. I just went back to work and did it badly for 4 months. Ethan kept his hands on his knees and let the silence be what it was. I'm sorry, he said, after enough time had passed. Not as a filler, just as a true thing. It was a long time ago. Doesn't make it smaller. She looked at her hands. No, she said. It doesn't. The Jeep was quiet after that. Just the engine and the road noise and the particular exhausted peace of people who had shared too much in too short a time and were now carrying it together without knowing quite what to do with it. When they reached the junction, Victoria's car was already there. A black sedan with a driver who stepped out when he saw the Jeep and came toward them with the alert, careful energy of someone who'd been briefed that the situation was abnormal. Victoria got out. She stood for a moment in the junction's open space, the mountains behind her and the cleared highway ahead, and she looked at Ethan, who had gotten out too without entirely deciding to. She was a mess, objectively. Dried blood at the hairline, coat stained, hair that had lost whatever shape it had started in. She looked nothing like the woman on the magazine cover. She looked like someone who had come through something and was still standing. The recording, she said. Can you get it to my legal team directly? Adkins. You said that's your attorney. She can coordinate with my general counsel. I'll call her when I get home. Okay? She adjusted the bag on her shoulder, looked at him. I don't usually... She stopped. There was a version of this moment he understood where she would have found the efficient professional exit, the clean handshake and the formal thank you and the appropriate distance of a person who kept her walls in good repair. She didn't do that. Thank you, she said. Not for the rescue. I mean, yes, for the rescue, but for the other things. She said it without specifying what the other things were, which meant she was trusting him to know, and he did. "Drive carefully," he said. She almost smiled. "You too." She got in the car. The driver got in. The sedan moved out onto the cleared highway toward Denver, and Ethan stood in the junction and watched it until it was small and then gone. Reyes was leaning against the Jeep. "Friend of yours?" she asked. "Not exactly." He looked at the sky. Clearing now, the overcast breaking up in places to show the first real blue of the morning. "Not yet," he said. Reyes raised an eyebrow but didn't push it. That was something he appreciated about the rescue team. They understood that some things that happen in bad weather didn't have names yet. He got in the Jeep, and they drove south toward Granby and Lily and the ordinary morning, and in his jacket pocket the satellite communicator was still warm from being used, and on his phone was a video that was already moving through channels toward people with authority. And somewhere on the highway ahead of him, a black sedan was carrying a woman he'd known for 8 hours and wouldn't stop thinking about for the next 4 months, which he didn't know yet, sitting in that Jeep, but which was already true. The storm was over. The thing it had started was not. He found out what happened at the board meeting from a news alert on his phone. It came in at 2:17 that afternoon while he was under a Chevy Silverado in the shop bay, his back on the cold concrete and both arms reaching into the undercarriage to locate a transfer case issue that had been making a sound the owner described as like rocks in a dryer. He heard his phone buzz on the workbench, ignored it, finished diagnosing the problem, slid out, and wiped his hands before he picked it up. The headline was short. Sterling Tech Board votes to remove 4 directors following federal investigation into securities manipulation. CEO, Victoria Sterling's position, reaffirmed unanimously. He read it twice. Then he set the phone down and went back to the Silverado, because the transfer case wasn't going to fix itself, and the owner needed it by Thursday. He called Adkins at 4. She had already spoken to Sterling Tech's general counsel twice, and was using a tone he'd only heard from her once before, when a contract dispute had involved a clause that she described as genuinely elegant, which was the highest praise she applied to anything. The recording was the thing that broke it open, she said. Combined with what their internal investigator had already compiled, the federal angle gave the shareholders enough cover to act fast. The 4 directors were out before noon. Were the men from the Suburban identified? Working on it. Counsel says there's a civil matter pending. Whether it becomes criminal depends on what they find regarding who gave the orders. A pause. "You did a good thing, Ethan." "I did a job," he said. "You did more than a job." He didn't argue with her. He thanked her and hung up and went to pick up Lily from school, and she was in the car for 90 seconds before she said, "Donna said you were out all night. She said there was a real bad storm." "There was. Did you help someone?" "Yeah." Lily considered this the way she considered most things. Seriously, with a 7-year-old's particular combination of incomplete information and surprisingly accurate instinct. "Was it scary?" "A little bit. But you did it anyway." "That's sort of what scary is for," he said. "Tells you the thing matters." She thought about that for the rest of the drive home, which meant she was probably going to bring it up again in 3 days with a follow-up question he hadn't anticipated. That was how her mind worked. He'd learned to give her things to think about rather than conclusions, because she didn't trust conclusions she hadn't reached herself. He made dinner. He helped her with her reading homework. He put her to bed at 8:30 and sat on the couch in the quiet of the house and looked at the ceiling for a while and thought about nothing in particular, which was a thing he was good at, and which sometimes meant he was actually thinking about something he hadn't named yet. His phone had no messages from Victoria. He hadn't expected any. He wasn't sure what he'd expected, which was its own kind of answer. But 2 weeks passed, then 3. The news cycle did what it did. The Sterling Tech story ran for 4 days, crested and settled into the background noise of financial media. He saw her name a few more times. An interview she'd given to the Wall Street Journal, a brief appearance on a business news channel that he watched for 40 seconds before turning it off. Because watching her in that context, composed and precise and entirely herself, felt like looking at someone through the wrong end of a telescope. He went back to his regular life with the thoroughness of someone who understood that regular life didn't maintain itself. The shop, the school runs, the grocery store, the Tuesday night sessions of Lily's soccer practice, which were less practice and more 7-year-olds running in approximate directions. Donna came for dinner on Fridays. Marcus from the rescue team stopped by with beer one Saturday, and they sat on the back porch in the cold and talked about the new radio equipment the county had approved, and Ethan told him about the storm in the careful, abbreviated version that left out most of the important parts. He didn't think about Victoria constantly. That would have been dramatic, and he was not a dramatic person. He thought about her the way you thought about something you'd seen that had rearranged your understanding of what was possible. Not obsessively, but returning to it, the way you return to a sentence in a book that didn't settle until you'd read it several times. He thought about what she'd said about his life, about the architecture of it. He thought about the way she'd said his daughter's name. He thought about what she'd told him in the outpost, in the particular dark honesty of people who expect to be past each other by morning. He thought about the recording that he'd started without deliberating, and how she'd said it might have saved her company, and how he hadn't known what to do with that. On a Thursday evening in the 4th week, Lily came home from school with a drawing she'd made in art class. It was a mountain and a truck and 2 stick figures and a helicopter. The 2 stick figures were holding lines. He looked more carefully and realized they were holding the rescue cord he'd described to her in one of the abbreviated explanations. "That's you," she said, pointing to the taller stick figure. Then she pointed to the other one. "And that's the lady." He looked at it. "How do you know it's a lady?" "I drew her hair." The stick figure did have what might generously be called hair, a series of vertical lines extending from the round head in a way that was fairly impressionistic but clearly intentional. "Good drawing," he said. "Donna said she was important. The lady." "She is." "Do you know her? Like, actually know her?" He thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I did for a night," he said. Lily looked at the drawing, then at him. "You should call her." "You don't call people like that." "Why not?" He didn't have a good answer to that. He'd been not having a good answer to that question for 4 weeks, which was its own kind of answer, which he was not going to explain to a 7-year-old. He put the drawing on the refrigerator. The call came on a Tuesday morning in February, 6 weeks after the storm. He was at the shop, which opened at 7:30, and he was the only one there because his part-time mechanic, a kid named Drew, didn't come in until 9 on Tuesdays. The phone rang, and he picked it up expecting a customer and heard instead a voice he recognized in the first 2 syllables. "It's Victoria," she said, as if there were other Victorias. He sat down on the stool behind the counter. "Hi." "Hi." A brief pause. "I should have called sooner. There was a lot of work after the board situation, the restructuring, the communications. I kept starting a message and not finishing it." "You don't owe me a message." "I know I don't. That's not why I'm calling." Another pause. The kind that meant something was being chosen carefully. "I'm going to be in Granby on Thursday. There's a state infrastructure meeting in Steamboat Springs on Friday, and I'm driving up a day early because I can't fly into it directly. I thought—" She stopped, started again. "I thought I could stop in Granby for a bit, if that wasn't strange." "Is it strange?" "I genuinely don't know. That's the honest answer." He looked through the shop window at the street outside. February in Granby, gray and cold and entirely ordinary. A pickup truck going by. The hardware store across the street with its lights on. The mountain visible at the end of the block, the same as it always was. "There's a diner on Main Street," he said. "The Pine View. Best coffee in town, which isn't saying much, but the pie is actually good." A beat. "What kind of pie?" "Cherry and Dutch apple. The cherry is better." "Thursday morning?" "I open the shop at 7:30. I can do 8. 8, she said. "All right." Then, "How's Lily?" The question surprised him. Not that she asked it. He'd expected her to be polite. But the way she asked it, specific and direct, the same way she asked everything, which somehow made it feel less like courtesy and more like she'd been thinking about Lily the same way he'd been thinking about Victoria without quite naming it. "She's good," he said. "She drew a picture of the rescue. You're in it." A silence. "I am?" stick figure, hair and everything. He could hear the quality of her silence change, that almost laugh again, but softer this time. "Tell her the hair is accurate," she said. He was smiling when he hung up. He stayed sitting on the stool for a minute afterward and let himself do that. But she was already at the Pineview when he arrived at 5 to 8, sitting in the booth by the far window with a coffee in front of her and her coat still on and her hands wrapped around the mug in the particular way of someone who'd driven a long way in the cold. She looked up when he came in. She looked different and exactly the same. The precision was still there, the way she held herself, the directness of her attention, but whatever armor she'd been maintaining when he first pulled her out of that car had changed in texture. Not gone, just different. Like a wall that still existed but had a door in it now. He slid into the booth across from her. "The coffee's bad, isn't it?" he said. "It's not great." "Order the cherry pie. It helps." She looked at the menu for exactly as long as it took to find cherry pie and then set it down. "How are you?" "Good. Normal. You?" "Also normal, which is—" She paused. "It's actually strange, after everything. I keep waiting for the next emergency. It's been 6 weeks and nothing's exploded. I don't know what to do with that." "Enjoy it." "I don't know how." He looked at her. "I know." "How do you—" She stopped, looked at him. "You do, don't you?" "Took me about a year after Pueblo to figure out how to live in a week that wasn't on fire. You get used to the adrenaline, you don't notice it's gone, and then you try to sit still on a Tuesday evening and you can't figure out why something feels wrong." He folded his hands on the table. "It's not wrong. You just haven't been still in a long time." The waitress came and he ordered coffee and cherry pie, and Victoria added cherry pie to her order without hesitation, which he appreciated. "The 4 directors," she said when the waitress had gone. "Gerald Marsh and Patricia Hale are cooperating with the federal investigation. Dennis Cho retained counsel and isn't talking. Robert Vance—" She paused. "Vance has disappeared, which means he was more involved than the others and smarter about it. Will they find him? The federal investigators think so. The money trail is the thing with these situations. People move themselves and forget about the money." She looked at her coffee. "Dennis Cho was the one who gave them the internal documentation. The memos from 18 months ago." Her voice was flat and even, which he'd learned to read as the version of her that had processed something difficult and was now carrying it as information rather than injury. "We'd worked closely together for almost 3 years. I'd gone to his wedding. I'm sorry. I keep thinking about the moment I chose him for the board. What I missed." She shook her head. "I went back and looked at our correspondence from that period, and I can see the tells now that I couldn't see then. The ways he angled for information, the questions that were a little too targeted." She looked up. "I was so sure my judgment was sound." "Your judgment was sound about plenty of things. Not about him." "No," he said, "not about him." He didn't soften it because she wasn't asking to be comforted. She was asking to be heard in the actual truth of it. But being wrong about one person doesn't mean your judgment is broken. It means you trusted someone who didn't deserve it, which is a thing that happens to every person who takes the risk of trusting at all. She looked at him steadily. "You're not going to tell me I should have seen it coming. Would that help?" "No." "Then no, I'm not." The pie arrived. She looked at it skeptically and took a bite, and her expression went through a small private revision. "Okay," she said, "the pie is good." "Told you." They ate in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, which was something, the particular ease of people who'd seen each other in conditions that stripped the social performance away, and found that what was underneath was sufficient. Outside, Main Street was doing its ordinary Thursday morning thing. A woman walking a dog. The hardware store owner shoveling his step. 2 teenagers going past on their way somewhere that wasn't school. "I've been thinking about what you said," Victoria said, "in the outpost, about building a life that fit what you were actually capable of, rather than what you'd planned for. I don't think I said it exactly like that. Something like that, about knowing what you were doing every day, about honest work." She pushed the pie plate slightly to the side. "I've been running Sterling Tech since I was 26. I built it from my father's wreckage, and I have been—" She paused. "I have been fighting for it constantly, for 4 years. And I won. And I sat in the boardroom after the vote, and the shareholders were clapping, and my legal team was congratulating me, and I thought—" She stopped. "What did you think?" She looked at the table. "I thought about you driving back to Granby. About Lily asleep in her room. About this completely ordinary town I'd never had any reason to drive through before." She looked up. "I thought about what it was like, for about 8 hours, to be in a situation where nobody wanted anything from me except for me to keep moving and stay warm." The diner was quiet. The espresso machine made a sound in the distance. "That's not a small thing," he said. "No, it's not." She met his eyes. "I'm not saying I want to stop. I didn't come here to tell you I'm giving up the company and moving to a mountain town. That's not who I am. I know that. But I've been thinking about what else there is, what I've been not building while I was building everything else." She paused. "I'm 30 years old, and the most honest conversation I've had in 2 years happened in a storm with a man I'd known for 40 minutes. He thought about that for a moment, about all the things it was and wasn't. "That's a pretty good argument for bad weather," he said. She laughed. A real one this time. Full, not caught before it happened. It changed her face in a way that he found he'd been thinking about without knowing it. "I like you," she said, simply, like it was a fact she'd confirmed and was reporting. "I like you too," he said, also simply. She looked at him for a moment, something resolving. "I have a meeting in Steamboat Springs tomorrow at 9. I was planning to leave tonight." "And now?" "And now I'm wondering if there's anything worth seeing in Granby on a Thursday afternoon." He considered. "There's a good hardware store. The mountain's always worth seeing. My shop, if you're interested in vehicles in various states of assembly." He paused. "And Lily gets out of school at 3. She knows you from a drawing she made. She'd probably want to verify the hair." Victoria looked at him. That expression again, the one she'd had in the outpost, at the end, when he'd said, "Then we can talk about Glad." The one he hadn't been able to categorize then, and was starting to understand now. "What would you tell her?" she asked. "About who I am. I'd tell her you're someone I helped once and who I'm getting to know." He held her gaze. "Is that true?" "Yes," she said. "I think that's exactly true." He left money on the table for the pie, and they walked out into the gray February morning, and she looked up at the mountain, same mountain that had nearly killed her 6 weeks ago, with an expression that wasn't fear or gratitude exactly, but something more complicated than either. "It's different in the daytime," she said. "Everything is." She looked at him sideways. He started walking toward the shop, and she fell into step beside him, her shoulder occasionally near his, on a sidewalk in a small Colorado mountain town on an ordinary Thursday in February. She stayed through the afternoon. She met Lily at 3:15 in the school parking lot, and Lily looked at her with the frank, comprehensive assessment that 7-year-olds deployed without apology and said, "Your hair is longer than I drew it." "You still got the color right," Victoria said. Lily considered this fair. She told Victoria about the drawing, the full explanation, the helicopter, the rescue cord, with the detailed authority of an artist discussing process, and Victoria listened with what Ethan recognized as genuine attention rather than performed patience. She asked follow-up questions. She got the details right when she repeated them back. On the drive home, Lily sat in the back seat and Victoria sat in the front. And somewhere on the last turn toward the house, Lily said from behind them, "Are you staying for dinner?" Victoria looked at Ethan. He kept his eyes on the road. "That's up to Victoria," he said. A moment. Then, "What are you making?" "I was going to do pasta. Nothing complicated." "Pasta is fine," she said. It was the most uncomplicated sentence she'd said in his presence since the first night, and it landed with a weight that had nothing to do with dinner and everything to do with what it was. A person choosing, for one evening, to be somewhere ordinary instead of somewhere important. She stayed through dinner. She stayed through Lily's post-dinner campaign to teach her the rules of a card game that Lily had invented herself and whose rules shifted slightly in Lily's favor whenever the game required it. She was, he noticed, a strategic enough thinker to identify exactly when the rules were changing and choose to lose gracefully anyway, which was its own kind of intelligence. When Lily was in bed, they sat on the back porch with the remnants of a bottle of wine he'd opened, and the cold was real but manageable, and the mountain was dark against the darker sky. "She's wonderful," Victoria said. "She is." He didn't qualify it. "She's also exhausting and occasionally infuriating, and she has a talent for asking questions at bedtime that require 20 minutes to answer." "What kind of questions?" "Tonight it was whether fish sleep." Victoria smiled. "Do they?" "Some of them. It's complicated." She looked at the mountain. "Do you ever regret it? The life here? She gestured vaguely at the house, the yard, the ordinary geography of his days. The scale of it. He thought about it honestly. Not the life. Sometimes the circumstances. The way it came about. He turned his coffee mug in his hands. But the life itself, the shop, this town, her. He shook his head. "No, I don't regret any of that." She nodded slowly. He had the sense of her measuring something against something. "I'm going to be in Colorado Springs in 2 weeks," she said. "Board meeting. The new configuration." She paused. "It's about 4 hours from here." "About that." "Is that—" She stopped, looked at him directly. "I'm not good at this. I want to say that up front. I'm very good at many things, and this is not one of them. Whatever this is." "I know," he said. "I'm not that good at it either. And your life is here. My life is a lot of places." "Yes." He looked at her. She was watching him with the same directness she'd used in the truck the first night, when she was covered in coffee and blood, and she'd said, "Don't tell anyone at my company where I am tonight." The look of someone deciding something before they said it. "Colorado Springs is 4 hours," he said. "That's manageable." Something in her face shifted. Not a smile exactly. Something quieter, more careful, more true than a smile. "Yes," she said. "It is." The mountain was dark and the yard was cold, and inside the house, Lily was asleep with the one-eyed rabbit and the drawing on the refrigerator that had a stick figure with accurate hair, and on the back porch, 2 people who were not good at this sat in the cold and were not particularly good at it together, which was, in its imperfect way, exactly right. Colorado Springs was 4 hours, like he'd said, and manageable, like they'd agreed, and over the following months that word, manageable, became a kind of private shorthand between them for the whole arrangement. Not easy, not seamless. Manageable. She called on the drive back from the Springs board meeting, which lasted longer than planned because the new board configuration meant 3 members who barely knew each other and 2 who actively disliked each other had to agree on a restructuring timeline. And by the time she was on I-25 heading north, it was nearly 9 at night, and she was running on conference room coffee and the particular brand of exhaustion that came not from physical effort but from sustained high-stakes human navigation. He was in the shop when she called. He answered on the second ring. "How'd it go?" he asked. Marcia's attorney tried to get a meeting agenda item removed and the new chair held firm. A pause. "Which was good. But it took 40 minutes and a parliamentary procedure argument that I had to help moderate, and I haven't eaten since noon. There's a drive-through in Monument that's decent, 20 miles north of the Springs." She was quiet for a second. "You know the highway between here and there?" "I drive it enough." "You've driven down here?" "Twice," he said. "Lily was with her mother for a weekend." Another silence. "You didn't tell me that." "You didn't ask." He heard her exhale, and it was the particular exhale of someone who was tired and trying not to be moved by something and not entirely succeeding. "I'll get food in Monument," she said. "I'll be in Granby by 11:30. "I'll be up." "You have work tomorrow." "I'll be up," he said again. She was there at 11:47. He heard the car on the gravel and met her at the door, and she came in and sat down at the kitchen table without taking her coat off, which was something she did when she was genuinely exhausted rather than just professionally tired. He made her a sandwich with what was in the refrigerator: turkey, mustard, reasonable bread, and she ate most of it without conversation, which he understood as its own kind of trust, that she didn't feel required to perform composure for him. "Thank you," she said when she'd finished. "It's a sandwich." "I know what it is." She looked at him across the table. "Thank you for the sandwich and for being awake, and for not asking me 40 questions about the meeting. I've got one question about the meeting. She looked at him warily. What? Is it done? The restructuring, the legal piece, all of it? Is it actually done? She thought about it. The federal investigation is still ongoing. Vance is still missing. There are civil suits that will take years. She paused. But the company is safe. The structure is solid. The people I trust are in the right positions. She looked at the table. So yes, the thing I was fighting for, that part is done. Good, he said. She looked up at him. That's all you wanted to know? That's all. She stayed the night. In the morning, Lily found her at the kitchen table with coffee and a laptop and greeted her with the complete absence of surprise that children demonstrated when a thing had been happening long enough to feel like it had always been there. She showed Victoria a tooth that was loose. Victoria examined it with appropriate gravity and confirmed that it did, in fact, seem very loose and would probably come out soon, which was the right answer and which Lily filed away with satisfaction before eating her cereal. Ethan watched them from the counter and did not name what he was feeling because naming it felt like rushing something that was going right at its own speed. The months moved the way months did, with the particular mix of routine and disruption that actual life was made of, which had nothing in common with how stories were supposed to go, but which was, in its uneven way, more interesting. Victoria came to Granby on the weekends when she could, which was not every weekend and sometimes not for 2 weeks at a stretch when something exploded at the company. And things exploded at the company with regularity because running a $4 billion infrastructure firm was not a thing that reached a steady state, regardless of how the board was structured. She was in Singapore for 9 days in March for a federal contract negotiation, and she called him from a hotel room at what was midnight for her and 6 in the morning for him, and he sat on the back porch with his coffee, and they talked for 45 minutes about things that had nothing to do with the contract, about a documentary Lily had become briefly obsessed with, about a car Ethan had restored for a customer who cried when she saw it running, about what Victoria had eaten for dinner, and whether the hotel had a view. It was, he thought, a strange thing to love. These conversations. The specific domestic texture of them, so far from dramatic, so different from the night they'd met. He didn't say that to her, not then, but he thought it. There were hard nights, too, because there were always hard nights in anything real. In April, she called him from Denver at 10 p.m., sounding like someone who'd been holding herself together since morning and had finally run out of reasons to keep doing it. The Singapore contract had come through, but at a modified scope that cut the projected revenue by 18%, and 2 of her key engineers had given notice within the same week. And she'd been in meetings for 11 hours, and someone on the new board, not the conspirators, the genuine replacements, had questioned a decision she'd made in a way that was reasonable and professional and had nonetheless felt, given everything, like being hit. I don't know if I'm, she said, and stopped. He waited. I don't know if I'm actually good at this anymore, at the big picture part. I keep thinking about the 8 months when they were working against me and I didn't see it clearly enough, and Victoria, I know, you saw it, he said. You saw it, and you built the case, and you survived a blizzard, and you fixed it. That's not the story of someone who can't see clearly. I was late. Everybody's late sometimes. The question is whether you got there. A silence. You always do that, she said. Do what? Find the version of the thing that's actually true instead of the version I'm catastrophizing. A pause. It's annoying. You want me to agree that you're incompetent? No, I want... She stopped. He heard her exhale, the long, real one, not the managed version. I want to be where you are right now. He looked at the backyard, the porch light, the mountain outline in the dark. 4 hours, he said. It's 10 o'clock. It's Friday. Lily's at Sarah's this weekend. Another silence. Different quality. I have a 7 a.m. call. I'll make coffee. She was there by 2:15. She was asleep by 2:45, which was the fastest he'd ever seen her shut off, like her body had been waiting for the specific condition of that particular place and had simply released the moment the condition was met. He lay awake for a while after and listened to the sound of her breathing in his house and thought about the mathematics of the last several months. All the miles, all the calls, all the mornings where she'd been present and evenings where she hadn't, and the particular discipline of wanting someone who existed in a different orbit and learning to want them in the shape their life actually allowed. He'd made mistakes in it. He knew that. There'd been a Sunday in March where she'd canceled for the third time in a row. Legitimate reasons every time. And he knew they were legitimate, and he'd still gotten quiet in a way that she'd noticed and called out directly, which was her way. And they'd had a version of the conversation that people in this kind of situation had. About distance. About whether distance was something you adapted to or something that accumulated. About what they were building, if they were building something, and whether the building required proximity that neither of their lives naturally offered. "I don't know how to do this differently," she'd said. "I'm not going to become someone who runs a smaller company so she can be somewhere on weekends. I'm not asking you to." "Then what are you asking?" He'd sat with that for a minute. "I'm asking you to tell me when it's too much, instead of managing it until it breaks." He'd looked at her. "That's what you do with hard things. You manage them. I need you to not manage this." She'd looked at him for a long time. Then, "That's harder than you think. I know. I've been managing things since I was 17. I know that too." She'd exhaled. "I'll try," she said. Not a promise, because she was careful about promises. Just, "I'll try." Which from her, he'd learned, was the honest version of the thing, and therefore worth more than the cleaner promise would have been. They'd gotten through the March conversation. April's bad night had ended with her sleeping in his house and him making coffee at 6:58 for her 7 a.m. call. May brought a weekend where nothing needed to be managed or navigated, where they drove up to the high country on a Saturday and Lily ran through a field of snow that had survived in the shadow of the north-facing ridge. And Victoria stood at the edge of the field with her hands in her coat pockets, watching and looking like a person who had found something she hadn't known she was missing. He'd seen her cry once. In June, in the kitchen, on a Tuesday evening when they were making dinner together, and she'd been cutting tomatoes and she stopped and put the knife down and said, "Vance turned himself in this morning," in the flat, factual voice that meant she was reporting something that had cost her more than she was showing, and he'd moved to where she was standing and she'd cried for about 4 minutes against his shoulder, not talking, not explaining, just releasing something she'd been holding since a blizzard in December, when she'd first understood how serious the threat was. He'd held her and not said anything, because there wasn't anything that needed to be said, because sometimes being held was the entire thing, and the words were beside the point. Afterward, she'd washed her face, picked up the knife, and finished the tomatoes. "Okay," she'd said, not to him exactly, to herself, the way she said things when she'd decided they were settled. He'd loved her for that. He'd loved her before that, but that specific moment, that specific sequence, the crying, the washing her face, the picking up the knife, had done something precise and clarifying to the thing he'd been feeling since February. He hadn't said it yet. There was a version of him that was waiting for the right moment, which he recognized as the version of himself that had learned to be careful about things that mattered. But the version of him that had driven to Colorado Springs twice without telling her, and who had learned to read the quality of her silences, and who kept coffee in the house that she liked even when she wasn't there, that version had known for a while. Robert Vance's cooperation with federal investigators broke the financial conspiracy open in ways the initial evidence had only suggested. The full scope was larger than Victoria had known. Meridian Systems' CEO had been coordinating with Marsh and Vance for over 2 years, and the operation had included not just the leaked financials, but a coordinated short-selling strategy that had manipulated Sterling Tech's stock price over 3 quarters. The federal charges that resulted affected 7 people, of which 4 took plea agreements and 3, including Vance and the Meridian CEO, faced trial dates in the following year. Victoria testified before the federal investigators in July. She told Ethan about it the night before, not the legal details, which Adkins had carefully coordinated with her legal team, but the particular weight of sitting in a room and making a formal record of the things that people she'd trusted had done. "It's strange," she said. "I've thought about it so many times, and saying it out loud to people with official pens and official recordings makes it finally be the thing it is, instead of the thing I was fighting. Is that good?" "I think so." A pause. I think being done fighting is allowed to feel like something. It is, he said. It's allowed. She testified. She came to Granby the following Friday and she slept for 10 hours, which was, she told him the next morning, the longest she'd slept since she was in college. He made breakfast. Lily had questions about what a federal investigator's office looked like, and Victoria answered them with more detail than Ethan would have, including a description of the chairs, which Lily found interesting for reasons that weren't clear. The summer moved. The federal case moved through its channels, slow and procedural and entirely outside their control, which Victoria had to learn to accept in the way that people who built things had to learn that some processes couldn't be managed from the inside. She got better at it. Not perfect. She still called Adkins too often, still read the court filings herself when she could have let counsel summarize them. But better. Sterling Tech's third quarter numbers came in August, 23% above projections. The Singapore contract, even at modified scope, had opened a relationship that was already expanding. Two of the engineers who'd given notice in April came back, one of them with a counteroffer that Victoria negotiated herself in a conversation she described as genuinely fun, which told him she was in a different place than April. Lily started second grade. She told her teacher on the first day that her dad fixed cars and her... She paused, apparently reconsidering the word she'd been about to use, and said Victoria instead. Victoria ran a company. The teacher, by Lily's account, had seemed interested. Lily had felt this was the appropriate response. Ethan heard this and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "What word were you going to use?" he asked. "Before you said Victoria." Lily was eating an apple. She didn't look up. "A different word." "What word?" "I changed it." "Lily." She looked at him with an expression of complete 7-year-old serenity. "I think that's a conversation for later," she said, which was a phrase she had absolutely gotten from him and was now deploying with a precision that he found both impressive and mortifying. He called Victoria that evening and told her, and she was quiet for a moment on the other end and then said, "What word?" And he said, "She wouldn't tell me." And Victoria was quiet again in a way that had warmth in it. "Okay," she said. Finally. "Just okay?" "I don't know what the right thing to say is, so okay." "That's the right thing," he said. Me too. October arrived and the mountains went gold the way they always did. Sudden and total. Like a decision rather than a transition. Victoria came for a long weekend in the middle of the month, and they drove up into the high country on the Saturday, all three of them, and Lily fell asleep in the back seat on the way home with her head against the window and the particular complete abandon of children who had used everything up and found the world sufficient. Victoria was in the passenger seat. She was watching the road ahead with an expression he'd been learning the vocabulary of for 9 months, quiet but present. The specific expression that meant she was somewhere just below the surface of the moment, thinking about something she might or might not say. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Yeah?" "I've been thinking about the night we met." She kept her eyes on the road. "Not the whole night. A specific moment. When you opened the door of the car and I looked at you and I thought, I have to be very careful about what I tell this person." "Were you wrong to think that?" "No, I was right. She paused. "I was careful for about 20 minutes, and then I told you things I hadn't said out loud to anyone." She looked at him. "Why do you think that was?" He considered it. "Because you were exhausted enough that management was too expensive?" "Maybe." She turned back to the road. "Or because there was something about you that was, I don't know. Safe isn't the right word. Safe is too passive," she thought. "Something about you that made the cost of honesty feel lower than the cost of pretending." "I'll take that." "It's a compliment." "I know it is." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been happy," she said. It came out like an admission, the way she said things that surprised her by being true. "Not every day, not every week, but in aggregate, over the last 9 months, I've been genuinely happy in a way I didn't know I was missing until I had it." She paused. "I wanted to say that." He drove for a moment without answering, not because he didn't have anything to say, but because he wanted to say the right thing rather than just the immediate thing, which was a habit she'd taught him by example. "I love you," he said. She turned to look at him. "I've known it for a few months," he said. "I was waiting for the right moment, and then I decided the right moment was probably whenever it was true enough to say, and it's been true enough for a while." He glanced at her. "That's the whole thing. I love you, and I wanted you to know." She looked at him for a long moment. The mountains were gold outside the windows, and Lily was asleep in the back, and the road was empty and familiar and entirely ordinary. "I love you too," she said. Without preamble, without qualification. Just that. He reached across and she took his hand and they drove home like that, through the gold Colorado afternoon, not talking, which was its own kind of conversation. The kind that happened after the important things had been said, and what was left was just the fact of them, together, in a moving vehicle on a mountain road, with a sleeping child in the back seat, and everything that had brought them here settled behind them like weather that had passed. He'd been planning it since September, not in a secret-keeping way. He didn't tell anyone because he didn't need to tell anyone, because the planning was simple and what it required was not execution, but patience. He'd looked at the ring in the case at a jewelry store in Granby in September and then driven past it twice before going in. The woman behind the counter had shown him 4 options without drama and without the particular pressure of someone trying to upsell, and he'd picked the one that felt right the way mechanical things felt right, not because of what it cost, but because of how it was made. Clean, well-proportioned, a single stone, nothing excessive, something that would last. He put it in the drawer of his nightstand and let the months finish themselves. December arrived. The first snow of the season came on a Thursday, and it came the way first snows did before they turned into weather systems, gently, without urgency. The air going white and soft in a way that was entirely different from what it became later. Lily was home from school, and she stood at the living room window watching it with the particular reverence that kids brought to first snows, the temporary amnesia that made each one feel new. Victoria had arrived the night before. She'd driven up from Denver. There were no flights into Granby, and she'd long since stopped minding the drive, which had become its own thing, 4 hours of mountain road that she now knew well enough to have opinions about which gas station on the pass made the better coffee. She'd come in smelling like winter and road, and had stood in the kitchen looking faintly pleased about something she hadn't explained, which he'd learned meant the company had done something she was proud of, but didn't want to lead with. He'd asked over dinner, and she'd told him. The federal plea agreements had included a component that required Marsh and Hale and the others to cooperate with an SEC review of the coordinated short selling, and that review had concluded with findings that would allow Sterling Tech's shareholders to pursue civil recovery. It was not resolved. These things moved on legal timelines that had nothing to do with human convenience, but it was moving, and it was moving the right direction. "So it's actually over," Lily said, with the authority of someone who had been following the situation in the way that second graders followed complicated adult situations, incompletely, but with strong opinions. "The worst of it," Victoria said. "The rest is paperwork." "I hate paperwork," Lily said. "So do I." "Then you should be a mechanic. Dad does paperwork, but he complains about it." Victoria looked at him. "Accurate?" "Deeply accurate," he said. In the morning, the snow was still coming down, still gentle, still the first snow version of itself. And Lily was in her coat and boots on the back porch watching it in the contemplative way of someone developing a theory. And Victoria was at the kitchen table with coffee and her laptop in the half-working mode she'd developed that he privately found endearing, the one where she was technically working but also present, available, not behind the wall. He took the ring from the drawer. He put it in his jacket pocket and zipped the pocket and went to the kitchen and stood there for a moment looking at her at the table and thinking about December of the previous year. The call at 11:42, the highway, the buried car, the slope, the cabin, the outpost, the drainage ditch, the junction, and every mile of road and every phone call and every ordinary evening and difficult night that had accumulated between that moment and this one. He thought about his father, who had died when Ethan was 19, and who had been a man of very few words and very consistent presence, and who had once said something that Ethan had been too young to fully understand, and had been understanding in pieces ever since. The people worth keeping are the ones who don't make you smaller. He thought about Victoria in the outpost, about the way she'd said thank you when he'd handed her the laptop bag on the slope. Not for the rescue, the real thank you had come later, but that first one, the practical one, the one that treated him like someone whose judgment about what to carry was worth trusting. He thought about how early that had been, how the first 40 minutes had contained everything that had followed. He went out to the back porch. Lily looked up at him. Victoria had followed. He'd heard her chair, heard her set down the coffee mug, and she was in the doorway behind him, and he turned to look at her standing there in the doorway with the snow falling past her into the yard. In his house, in the town she'd had no reason to ever drive through before a blizzard made the decision for her. "Come out here," he said. She looked at him. She stepped out onto the porch. The snow was soft and steady, and very quiet the way first snows were quiet. The particular hush of precipitation that hadn't yet become weather, that was still only itself, unhurried and sufficient. Lily was watching him with an expression that meant she knew something was happening, which told him she was smarter than he'd given her credit for, which he already knew but kept being reminded of. He reached into his jacket pocket. Victoria saw his hand go into the pocket, and he watched her face move through something. Not surprise exactly, but the thing that happened before surprise, the moment before the thing you'd maybe hoped for arrived as a real event and stopped being a hope. He went down on one knee in the snow on the back porch. It was cold. The snow was getting into the knee of his jeans, which was very practical and not particularly romantic, but it was honest, and honest was what he had. "I'm not going to say a lot," he said. "You know me well enough to know that whatever I say is what I mean, and what I mean is that I want this to be the rest of it. You and me and Lily and the distance and the hard weeks and the ordinary Tuesdays and all of it." He looked up at her. "I want to marry you, Victoria, if you want that too." She had her hand over her mouth. He'd seen her in a board meeting on a video call once, handling 4 simultaneous crises with the calm of someone who had long since made peace with being the person who held things together. He'd seen her cry in his kitchen. He'd seen her losing at a rigged card game with deliberate grace. He'd seen her asleep on his couch and under pressure in an outpost in a blizzard, and every version in between. He'd never seen her look like this. She crouched down so she was level with him in the snow, which was not how this was supposed to go, and was completely her, and she took his face in both hands, and she was crying, which she would have been embarrassed about a year ago and wasn't embarrassed about now, which was its own kind of evidence. "Yes," she said. Simple, direct. The way she said the things that were true enough to not need decoration. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. He'd guessed the size by looking, which could have been a disaster and wasn't, and which he was going to consider a small personal victory for the rest of his life. Lily, who had been watching all of this from approximately 4 feet away with an expression of complete satisfaction, said, "I knew that was going to happen." "When did you know?" Victoria asked, still crouched in the snow, still holding Ethan's face. "September," Lily said. "When you started keeping your own shampoo here." Ethan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Ethan. "She's not wrong," he said. Victoria laughed. The full one, the real one, the one she didn't catch anymore. She stood up and pulled him up with her, and Lily inserted herself between them with the aggressive affection of a child who knew when she was part of something and intended to be recognized as such. And the 3 of them stood on the back porch of an ordinary house in a small Colorado mountain town while the first snow of winter came down around them, soft and unhurried, without emergency, without urgency, just snow falling the way snow fell when it had nowhere urgent to be. He thought about what the rescue dispatcher had said on that December night a year ago. "You're the closest." And he'd thought it meant proximity, miles, road distance. He thought it meant he was the nearest warm body to a stranded vehicle on a mountain highway. He understood now that closest was a different measurement entirely. There was a version of this story that said the storm was the thing that changed everything. That one night and one blizzard and one woman in one buried car had redirected the entire course of 2 lives. And that was true. It had happened. The event was real. But the thing Ethan had learned in the year between that night and this morning was that storms didn't build anything. Storms only cleared what was already there, stripped the road down to its actual surface, removed the distance between what people pretended and what they were. The storm hadn't created Victoria's courage or her capacity for honesty. It hadn't created his steadiness or his habit of being present. It had only put them in the same space and turned off the noise and let them see each other without the management. What they'd built after that, that was theirs. Every phone call and every driven mile and every hard conversation and every ordinary dinner and every morning of coffee and every night he'd been awake and every time she'd been somewhere else and chosen to come back anyway. That was not the storm. That was the work. He believed in his quiet, unshowy way that life generally gave you the people you were ready for. Not always in the way you expected, not always at a convenient time, sometimes through a cracked guardrail in a blizzard at midnight, which was about as inconvenient as it got. But ready or not, the person arrived, and what you did with the arrival was the actual story. What you did with the arrival was everything. The snow kept falling, soft and indifferent and kind, the way it fell every December in these mountains regardless of who was watching, regardless of whether anyone was watching at all, because the mountains were like that, had been like that long before any of them arrived, and would remain like that long after. Which was either humbling or reassuring, depending on the day, and today it was both. Lily had started catching snowflakes on her tongue, which she'd been doing since she was 3, and which she would probably still be doing at 37, because some things about a person settled early and stayed. Victoria watched her. She had her hand in Ethan's and the ring on her finger, and she was watching a 7-year-old catch snowflakes in a backyard in Colorado. And she looked like someone who had won something she hadn't known she was competing for, which was the best kind of winning, which she understood now in a way she hadn't understood before a December night, when the weather had made a decision for her, and a man in a rescue truck had come down a slope to a car she couldn't get out of alone. She thought about her father, about the company he'd built that hadn't survived him. She'd built something that would... She believed that now, on the other side of everything, in a way she could hold without fear. She'd built it to last. She'd defended it when it mattered, and she'd learned in the years since that the things that lasted required the same thing the company required. Not perfection, not seamlessness, but presence. Consistent, honest, unglamorous presence. Ethan was that. She was learning to be that here, in this specific place with these specific people, in the parts of her life that had nothing to do with the company and everything to do with who she was when the company wasn't in the room. Cold? Ethan asked, beside her. A little. We can go in. She looked at the snow, at Lily, at the mountain above the tree line, the same mountain that had tried to kill her a year ago and which looked this morning entirely peaceful, as mountains always did the morning after. Not yet, she said. He didn't argue. He put his arm around her and they stood in the cold together, and the snow kept coming down and Lily kept catching it on her tongue, and the mountain kept being the mountain, enormous and patient and entirely without opinion about any of it. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. The storm that had nearly destroyed everything had been, all along, the storm that led them home.